Well, good afternoon and welcome back to another live iThemes training event. My name is Nathan Ingram. I'm the host here at iThemes Training, and we're joined today by Michael Moore. Michael's been on the iThemes support team for almost 3 years now, and in that time, he has answered more than 10,000 support tickets on security-related issues. Now, that's a lot. So, Michael is definitely an expert when it comes to helping WordPress users secure their websites. And our focus today in this webinar is the top 5 WordPress security vulnerabilities and how to protect yourself. So if you're just joining us in GoToWebinar, make sure you head over to the chat room, ithemes.com/chat. You'll find the slide link there in the chat room, and that's the best place to get your questions answered. So Michael, let's just start off with a kind of an overview question, and that's why does WordPress security need to be a top priority for every WordPress site owner?
You spend so much of your time creating a website, making it special to you and special for your users, and you want to be proactive in your security this so you can protect your hard work and your creation.
Absolutely. And so once you spend all that time building the site, taking a few extra steps to secure it and then keep it secure is so important. And we're going to be talking about some tips to do that by patching these 5 WordPress security vulnerabilities. And again, if you're just joining us in GoToWebinar, several of you just popping in there, make sure you head over to the chat room, ithemes.com/chat. Feel free to ask your questions as we go today. I'll do my best to pull those out of the chat room, and we'll give those to Michael, and we'll wrap up today with a good Q&A around WordPress security. So ask your questions as we go, as you think of them, and we'll have a good conversation as we wrap up at the end of the presentation today. So Michael, let's talk about these 5 vulnerabilities. Where do we start?
All right, let's start with number 1, which is poor hosting. Now, not all web hosts are created equal, and so it's very important that you take your time to choose the right one. Now, most hosts are very, very good and secure, but there are some that don't properly separate the user accounts. And what this means for you is if there is someone else who isn't proactive in creating a security strategy for their site and their site becomes vulnerable, there is a chance that your site will also become vulnerable, because on shared hosting environments where they don't properly separate users' account, the security is only as strong as the weakest link. So it's important you choose the right host. And you also want to inquire about your hosting's update routine. There are hosts that are running versions of PHP that have reached end of life. And 27% of WordPress sites are running a version of PHP that has reached the end of its life. That means it's no longer getting security patches, no longer getting any updates. 38% of WordPress sites are running a version of PHP that will reach the end of its life at the end of this year. So come January 1, version 5.6 of PHP will no longer be receiving security updates. And 37% of sites are running a version of MySQL that will reach the end of its life by the end of this year. So just on some of the numbers I just shared with you, you can see that not all hosts will update everything the way that they should. Because if you'd be surprised how many sites I go into and I see that their hosts have not updated Apache, PHP, MySQL, all of these things that are out of the user's control, and then they will refuse to update to the current version because they're scared that it's going to cause conflicts on some sites. And it's like, well, when there's no security vulnerabilities, you need to patch them.
Yeah, really. So for the typical person, and Paul just commented in the chat room, I think he, like a number of folks, did not realize that PHP 5.6 will no longer be getting security updates at the end of the year. So how do you, what's the best way to go about contacting your host? What do you ask? What do you need to find out to make sure that you are running correct versions of software?
When you reach out to your hosting support, just ask them specifically what versions of PHP, Apache, and MySQL you're running, or they're running in your environment, and then you can always look up PHP, like just Google PHP end of life or MySQL end of life, and it'll show you the exact time where The first step is it'll stop receiving future updates, and then the second step in software before it reaches the end of its life, it'll still receive security patches, but eventually all things must come to an end. And so updating to 7.0 of PHP by the end of this year is of the utmost importance.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is a page actually on WordPress.org. I'm going to drop that link in the chat room. It's WordPress.org/about/requirements. And WordPress itself is now saying that they recommend that your host supports PHP version 7.2 or greater, MySQL 5.6 or Maria 10, and HTTPS. So there's a link there straight from WordPress so that if your host pushes back any on these old versions, you can say, look, this is what WordPress itself is recommending.
And another thing you might want to ask about is what TLS version your host is using, because 1.0 is officially deprecated and most modern browsers are stopping support for it this month, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a number of things that if you haven't really checked into what is happening with your host and the versions of software and all the stuff on the server side, that's really something you ought to look into if you haven't done that in a while. And the question is, what was that last requirement? TLS, as in Tom, Larry, Sam. That is the software that gets your site into HTTPS. And Stacy is asking Michael, what TLS version?
2.0.
So TLS 2.0 is what you're wanting.
Yeah, 1.0 is being deprecated.
There you go. So great. A lot of good information there. Definitely do your homework on your host and make sure that you are in a good hosting environment. By the way, iThemes hosting is made for WordPress. It meets all those requirements, and it's an excellent place for your website to live. Let's talk about the next one here, Michael.
The second vulnerability on the list is your WordPress login. It is the most commonly attacked of the WordPress vulnerability because it provides the easiest access to your site admin. Brute force attacks, most common method of trying to exploit WordPress login, and the reason why is it is a very low barrier of entry for any low-skilled developer to be able to create a script that just goes around and attempts to do brute force attacks. So that's why it's so common, is just because it's easy for someone to do, and it is everyone can find your WordPress login. So one thing I want to go over is you need to have a secure password strategy for your site. You want a minimum of 12 characters, and all these numbers right here on time it takes to crack. This is all based on an i5 4-core processor, and these are the estimated times to crack a password. 7 characters will take only 0.29 milliseconds to crack. 8 characters will take 5 hours to crack. 9 characters, 4 months. 10 characters will take 1 decade to crack. 12 characters will take 2 centuries to crack. But unfortunately, some hackers are now leveraging GPUs and stronger CPUs to decrease the amount of time needed to crack your password. So some additional things you want to keep in mind when creating your password is you want to avoid using sequential strings and like 1, 2, 3, 4, ABC, and want to use random characters. And then you also want to use a large pool of characters, not just lowercase. If you are only using lowercase letters, you are limiting the possible pool of characters needed to crack your password to 26. Now, if you're using alphanumeric, uppercase, lowercase, and ASCII symbols, you are upping the character pool total to 92 that they'll need to guess to crack your password. Another thing is do not reuse passwords. Reusing passwords is a huge mistake, and here's why. There is constantly, we're being informed that there's been some kind of database dump where people's username and passwords have been leaked. And this is a starting point for any of these people running scripts to brute force attack your site. So let's say that you are using your username and password for your email address, and you're also using your email address is the username and your password is the same password you use for your email address, and that becomes hacked. Now they can go into your email address, scrape all that information from there, see all your different accounts, and just start plugging away and see where the username and password they have fits. And then one cool thing that the iTheme Security Pro plugin has, it takes advantage of the Have I Been Pwned API. So when a user creates a new password, it's going to compare it to against a list of known compromised passwords. And if it's part of that, if it's in one of the list of compromised passwords, iTheme Security is not going to allow that user to use it. Because unfortunately, this is why it's important to have a security strategy for all your users of your site, because even if it's a customer, my dad, for example, he had one of his accounts hacked, and he blamed the company who held his account, and really it was his fault because he had his username and password was part of the Yahoo email database dump, and he was reusing that password at this other place, but yet they still took the responsibility for it, and they still took the blame for my dad, even though he was probably at fault and should have been using stronger passwords and not reusing his passwords. Also, a fun little tidbit you want to keep in mind is that the most common password that was included in all database dumps was 123456. And your WordPress security login is only as strong as the weakest link. So make sure you're requiring strong passwords. Most security plugins, you can do that. iTheme Security has a 4-strong password for privileged users at least, because they can edit the site and make changes, and you want to make sure you secure it.
Yeah, really great information there. Dropped a couple of links there in the chat room for a previous webinar we did last year on the LastPass password manager, which can help you generate those long, complex passwords. Marcy also gave us a good link at howsecureismypassword.net. That's from the folks at Dashlane, another password manager. That's a really good resource to test the strength of your passwords. And then we also have the haveibeenpwned.com link there. If you haven't checked that out, that is a really nice resource as well. Michael, it's sometimes hard to get especially non-technical users to use a complex password. Do you have any tips for people who are dealing with that situation, maybe with relatives, like your dad had that issue, or maybe they're people working with clients? What do you say to people who are having that struggle to get others to use a complex password?
When it's easier said than done. I installed on my dad's computer, I installed LastPass, showed him how to do it, but yet he had it wasn't part of his workflow, it wasn't part of his routine, and so he's still not using it. And you can't force people to use it, but especially if you're taking care of a client site, explain to them the importance of having a strong password, because they don't want to be the reason their site gets hacked and they lost their customers' trust. Because if you're storing other customer information and they're using a weak password and they're reusing passwords and they use their username and password to breach the site, it is their responsibility, and that's on them, and that's not on you. And I would be as clear as possible when explaining to them that if their site becomes compromised based on that is going to be on them, and that's not going to be on your plate. But again, you can't force them, but you can let them know very clearly that will not be your responsibility.
Yeah, and that's great advice. I actually have a line similar to that in my contract that I use for client work that states that by logging into the website, you're agreeing to use a complex password that is not used anywhere else other than this WordPress site. So that if you are a person who is working with clients, Michael's just giving you some great advice, and you can have a statement like that in your contract that disclaims liability if the site is compromised because the person has a low strength password.
Yeah, because the truth is you can't make them, but you can mitigate your responsibility.
Absolutely.
All right, and then the next step of securing your WordPress login is using two-factor authentication. Two-factor authentication requires an extra code along with the WordPress username and password to log in. There are many methods of two-factor, but if you can avoid it, do not use the text messaging version of two-factor, just because it's the least secure, and there's a growing number of people intercepting that text message and then using it to take advantage of people's accounts. You can look it up, like text message, SMS, two-factor exploit, and you'll see tons of news articles about. There was not that long ago that a bunch of banks in Europe were compromised because of this, because they were using a skimmer and it was easy to do. So I personally recommend using a mobile application like Authy or Google Authenticator. I personally use Authy because it also comes with a browser extension, which makes it easier for me to use a secure password to unlock my two-factor codes and then copy and paste it from my Authy extension to where I need it. And so not inconvenient at all. And in order to implement two-factor on your site, just use the security plugin, like, again, iTheme Security Pro, and it makes it really, really easy to configure for you and your clients. And then you also want to limit login attempts. By default, WordPress does not limit the amount of times a would-be hacker can attempt a wrong username and password. So they can keep going and going and going until they finally get the correct one. And we saw from those numbers earlier, and eventually they'll get the right password. It's just a matter of time. And so my recommendation is, like, after a few, like 4 or 5 invalid login attempts, they just need to be locked out. That way they can't make any more attempts and your site is secure and they won't be able to just keep guessing.
Yeah, and there's a good deal of chatter going along in the chat room right now about two-factor authentication. And anytime you bring up two-factor, there's always the comment of, "Wow, it's such a pain to deal with," and it is an extra step. It is an extra. That's the whole point. But I'll tell you, I had a client about 6 months ago who had an account at let's just say a very large registrar, and you could probably guess which one it is. They offer hosting and lots of other things, but her password got compromised, and because she didn't have two-factor, this particular hacker was able to get into her account, set up about 5 different web hosting plans, and set up phishing sites on each one of those. And the person continued to access even though she was changing passwords. But it wasn't until we actually added two-factor on that website for the registrar that we were actually able to stop those issues. And so, having that extra level of security on critical sites or sites where you're the administrator, for example, in WordPress, it's really an important step, because if your password gets compromised, you're wide open.
And iTheme Security Pro just implemented their trusted device feature. And part of the trusted device feature, if you go in your two-factor settings now, you will now see a checkbox to remember this device for 30 days. That is not the most secure. The most secure is to enter the two-factor token every single time. But I would rather you have it on your account and have it remember your device than not have it at all. And that way you're only entering it once every 30 days. And that's not that inconvenient. Another cool thing about the trusted device feature, if someone does log in with the untrusted device, it's going to send an email to that user and make them confirm that this should be a trusted device. And until they confirm it, it will remove all of the admin privilege capabilities from that user, so they can't do anything, which is awesome. Another bonus, there's using XML RPC, hackers can do what's called a brute force amplification attack, which means they can, with one HTTP request, they can submit hundreds of guesses of your username and password. So let's say you are limiting it to 4 or 5 attempts, that's still going to give them 1,000 guesses before they're locked out. So you can limit, in the iTheme Security Pro WordPress tweak settings, you can limit the number of requests or get username guesses to 1 per request to kind of dampen that vulnerability and that threat.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think Security Pro will allow you to lock out that entire threat. There's a good question here from Paul. He says, if all users on the site are not using two-factor, does it make sense for just one person, such as him, as the administrator, to use it?
Yes, it's just even if no one else is using it, you adding it to your account is going to mitigate a large amount of risk, especially if you're an admin user. And beyond that, it is your responsibility as someone, an admin user, to use it. That way, no one can use your account to make changes to the site. So, as many people as you can get to use it, the better. But one is definitely better than none.
Yeah, absolutely. And, as a matter of course, what you may want to do is just require that all administrator accounts use two factor. So even, if like me, you do provide your clients an administrator login just in principle because they do own the website, just so they have it. You still want to lock that up with two-factor authentication. And Michael, I think security allows you to do that, right? To by
Yeah,
role. How does that
yeah,
work?
you can force two-factor by role. So, I definitely recommend forcing every user that has any kind of editing capabilities to use two-factor. Just the more you can mitigate the risks of someone going in there and being able to make changes, the better off your life will be. Like, and when you are explaining it to users who are reluctant to use it, one, now they only have to do, if you're using iThemes Security Pro, they only have to do it once every 30 days. And then two, it is way less inconvenient to use two-factor than it is inconvenient to clean up a site that's been compromised and let your customers know that their data has been compromised. That's not going to be a fun conversation to have. I would rather have to copy and paste a code once every 30 days because it's the best thing you can do to secure your WordPress login, which is the most attacked part of any WordPress site.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So two-factor is a huge issue, and limiting those login attempts also really important. What's the third vulnerability?
Third vulnerability is running outdated software. Updates are not just for new features or fixes. Updates can also include very important security patches to known vulnerabilities, known exploits. You should have a routine, just like your host. You should have a routine to update all your software to make sure you're on the latest security patches. And then you can, using the iTheme security version management feature, you can go ahead and just automatically update your WordPress core plugins, themes, and that way you can always be sure you're on the latest security patch and just not making outdated software an issue. Outdated software is the number one exploit that people use to successfully hack a site. They find the exploit in outdated software and they exploit it, and all of a sudden your site's compromised. And it's something you can prevent.
So, so for the record, Paul is saying that he actually did some programming on that Commodore PET that you have a picture of there.
Oh, Sailor made these slides for me. She's the designer here, and as soon as she sent that to me, I was like, "Oh my gosh, I love that you use that image." Um, Paul, I really like that. I really dug that image. It's very cool.
So, Michael, what would you say is a good rule of thumb for how often to update WordPress core themes and plugins?
Me personally, just because I am very security conscious and security aware, I would say immediately. But I understand that's not realistic for everyone. I don't personally manage hundreds of sites. I have a couple personal sites that I manage, and that's not, and I just enable the uh, version management feature in iTheme security so I don't have to worry about it. But I would say at least weekly, you need to go in and check and make sure everything's up to date and apply those updates that way. Because as soon as a vulnerability is made public, typically there is a patch to go along with it. And you'll find that hackers will immediately start scouring the internet looking for any kind of signs that someone is running that software so they can exploit it. Now they're constantly looking for it. So it's important to get those updates done as soon as possible, but at least on a weekly basis.
Yeah, absolutely. And so Marcy's saying that she uses iThemes Sync to manage websites, and Sync does send out those notification emails to let you know that there are themes or plugins or WordPress core that need to be updated. So iThemes Sync is definitely a good partner with that. And just like Michael is saying, in the services I provide to clients, I update typically once a week. Now, I'm also watching WordPress security industry news, and when there is a vulnerability, 3 or 4 times a year there'll be some big thing that happens in the WordPress ecosystem, and I'll go update sites every few days or every couple of days at that point. But once a week is pretty typical for me as well.
And that's very reasonable, and that's probably okay. I just am obviously a little bit more concerned about updates just because I work on a security plugin, so top of mind awareness. But once a week is probably great.
So Marcy she said something here in the chat. She says she's using 3 different web hosts right now, and she's noticed that 2 of them have started automatically updating plugins. What do you think about that?
I think that's great if they're doing it. Here's my concern about it is I always recommend everyone have a staging site. That way you can test out the updates on a dev site before you're pushing them out on the live site. And because unfortunately things are going to conflict. An update from one plugin, a bad update from one plugin could break something on a good plugin and cause your site to be down. And I would rather, one, being aware of it, and 2, have it get done on a staging site to mitigate the risk of the site going down. So I think that's great best practices, and I understand why they do that, because they're taking the because unfortunately the host is usually the first person to get the finger pointed at them when someone's site gets hacked, and they're like, you know what, we're just going to make sure that, since the number one way a website or any software gets hacked is by exploits and outdated software, we're just going to take that risk out of our users' control.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the one thing that I would say in addition to that is it makes me really nervous if a host, apart from my input, is just going to go update plugins, because I know from my experience that there are certain plugins that when a major version drops, they tend to have breakages. WooCommerce being one of those, and all the associated plugins you might have to make that WooCommerce install work on this particular website. When a big release for WooCommerce comes out, I'm typically waiting a while just to make sure that there aren't any other issues. So if you're on a host that's automatically updating plugins for you and they're not using some sort of visual regression testing like Liquid Web Managed WooCommerce does, you really want to look into that and make sure that that at least you're checking to make sure the site isn't broken after automatic updates happen. Here's a good question from Melanie. She'd like to know, when a client uses a plugin and decides to deactivate it, but then leaves it on a site just in case they change their mind, should it just be deleted?
Oh, did you see my next slide already?
I don't think so.
Oh, yes, it should be deleted.
It should be deleted.
Yeah, let's go ahead and go to the next slide.
Yeah, let's go to the next slide.
PHP Exploits. It's all about mitigating the risk of having extra code on there that, like deactive plugins that you don't need anymore, that just is PHP executable code that someone can take advantage of. So anytime if they deactivate the plugin and they no longer delete it, just get rid of it. There are some plugins, like if they're not activated and they're not licensed, they're not going to show you that there's an update available for it. And even though it's not active, the code is still on your site and someone can still go in there and exploit. So remove it. Also, part of this is avoid using abandoned plugins. If a plugin hasn't been updated for at least for around 6 months, you are going to want to inquire to the developer to make sure it's abandoned. A plugin not having any recent updates doesn't necessarily mean it has been abandoned. It could just mean that the plugin is now feature complete and will only receive updates to ensure compatibility with latest versions of WordPress and PHP. But definitely remove any unnecessary code from your site to limit the chances of exploit opportunities. So Melanie, great question. And yes.
There, some time ago, we did on the iThemes plugin roundup. We did a plugin called "No Longer in Directory" that would go and scan your existing plugins to see if there were any plugins that were no longer in the directory. However, I've just discovered that the plugin "No Longer in Directory" is now no longer in the directory, so
Oh,
that
wow.
is not an option anymore. But doing a periodic site audit, especially of maybe a site that you're taking over from somebody else, looking at all those plugins and making sure that they're receiving, they're being updated on a regular basis by the developer, and that if they are a premium plugin, that they are licensed, like Michael mentioned, so that they are receiving updates. Looking at all those on a regular basis is a really good idea.
Yeah, the great thing about WordPress is that it's so accessible and that you can go to the WordPress.org plugin repo, and there's all these free options of open source plugins that's contributed by the community that you can use. But unfortunately, especially with the free ones that are just one person kind of working on it, it was just kind of a passion project, but life gets in the way and it becomes abandoned, and they can no longer manage it, that could be putting your site in danger, which kind of works into our next one as well, is installing software from untrusted sources. This is something you need to be aware of. I don't know how many times in support someone has come to us saying that they bought our software from us and they sold it to them as if it was from us. But one, it wasn't working on their site. We couldn't give them support because we don't know what's in the plugin. And then two, when I was doing research for this, I looked up nulled plugins, and the very first plugin that I looked at, as soon as I downloaded it, I was getting warnings that this is malicious software, this has malware in it. And this is just, you want to make sure it's from legitimate sources, because you don't want to be the person that's literally not even, no matter what you do, if you just install a plugin that has exploits on it, it doesn't matter what else you do, because you just put the virus on your site. So it's very, very important to be mindful of this. I learned this lesson when I was younger, when I went to get a pirated version of Windows from Pirate Bay. I installed on a computer. There's this one browser that they had installed that the icon was exactly like a Chrome icon, and it wasn't Chrome, couldn't get rid of it, and all it was doing was trying to gather any information that it could from me, man in the middle kind of stuff, where it was just going to scrape all my username and passwords. And you don't want to put that on your site. Another cool thing about the trusted devices feature that iTheme Security just added is that it does help protect you against session hijacking. And what session hijacking is when you're already logged into your site, and then the would-be hacker who had added malicious code to a plugin from an untrusted, sketchy plugin repo will then try to take over your session so they can steal your admin privileges to make changes on your site. But using the trusted devices feature, it will recognize that someone's trying to steal the session from you, and then it'll put a stop to that, which is huge. And the new trusted devices feature in iTheme Security Pro, if you haven't checked it out yet, you really need to take the time to look at it, because it is really, really cool. You can go to ithemes.com/YouTube, and that will take you to our new YouTube page that we're working on. And you'll see me interviewing Timothy, the iTheme Security Pro developer who created the trusted device feature, and it goes in a little bit more detail about how great the feature is. It's a really, really cool, just powerful feature.
Awesome. And just dropping a couple of links there in the chat for the new Trusted Devices blog post that kind of explains that feature. And there's also the YouTube video that Michael was just mentioning. So definitely check that out if you haven't done that already. It's really a nice new feature to iTheme Security Pro.
All right. And then the bonus is running a site that doesn't have SSL. It's pretty amazing to me that I'm still running into sites that don't have an SSL certificate installed. And what's even more surprising to me is that I was talking to a customer of ours, and their host was wanting to charge them $50 every 6 months to have an SSL cert installed on their site. Now, many hosts are doing it for free now, including iThemes hosting. But if you're on a host and they're trying to charge you a bunch of money for it, check out this cert bot. It's not too complicated to use, and you can configure it to get you a free SSL certificate from Let's Encrypt. And then you can also set it up to automatically renew your SSL certificate. That way you're always up to date. You never have to worry about it expiring. And your host shouldn't be charged like $50 every 6 months to do something that's just a couple clicks of a button for them, because they already have all these scripts set up anyways. So yeah, iThemes hosting, free automatic configured SSL certificate. If you are on a host that's starting to charge you for it, definitely check out that cert bot. Before I migrated my sites over to iThemes hosting, I was on DigitalOcean, and I was easily able to get that cert bot going. And then once I set it up, I could forget about it because it automatically updated everything for me. So it's a good deal. iThemes hosting now, I don't have to worry about it. Lou and those guys, they take care of that for me automatically. And then also, once this is available for download, here's a simple WordPress security checklist that you can use to make sure that you are securing yourself from vulnerabilities. And like Nathan was saying earlier, it is great to do an audit of the security of your site, just to make sure everything's up to par to your standards and how you want it, because it's important to be proactive in maintaining the security of your site. And then, of course, iThemes Security Pro, I definitely recommend it because I know the people who work on it, and I definitely trust putting my site in their hands. And just so everyone knows, there's currently a 35% off site-wide sale. So you can go there. And then also another quick plug for the iThemes channel that we're trying to do and trying to build. Don't forget to subscribe, because we're going to put webinar replays on the YouTube channel, as well as more videos and tutorials about all things WordPress. And also, if you don't mind, if you will send me emails of any kind of WordPress security related videos that you would like to see, if you go to that channel, put something in one of the comments of one of my videos that I've made there, which they're not great yet, but they're getting better, I promise. I would love to get your guys' feedback to see what you would like to see in like a quick 5 to 10 minute YouTube video. So
very good. Yeah, and Michael is mentioning something that we haven't actually announced here on a webinar yet. It's a very new. We're actually rebuilding our YouTube channel for iThemes Training. And there are a few videos out there now, but we'll be building that as we go. So if you are a YouTube person who enjoys YouTube, check out it's ithemes.com/YouTube. We'll take you right to our channel and allow you to subscribe, and all of the videos from webinars and additional training videos will be added there as we go. We're going to have plenty of time today for Q&A about WordPress security. So if you have a question, not necessarily even pertaining to what Michael's talked about today, but if you have a question related to WordPress security at all, drop that in the chat room, ithemes.com/chat, and this is your chance to get it answered by Michael, who is a WordPress security specialist. So here's a question from Marcy from earlier when we were talking about making sure that you install plugins from reputable developers. She said, when I search for a plugin, there's always so many choices. She's not sure who to trust, whether it's in the WordPress plugin directory or maybe other places like different plugin marketplaces. Michael, what do you have to say to somebody who's trying to figure out if a developer is going to be reliable or not for a plugin?
Do a Google search of their name and then reach out to them. If it's in the WordPress.org repo, there's probably going to be a conversation going on in the forum where you can get other people's feedback, see the reviews on them. But a lot of these guys, like, they're going to be, like, especially in the .org repo, those do get checked by their security team, and they do their best to keep up with that stuff. Obviously, when the repo is as large as it is, there's going to be some slip-ups. But generally speaking, most people are good. Like they really are. And so you just want to make sure you do your due diligence, reach out to the developer themselves, and see how long they've been in the WordPress community and check what the reputation is elsewhere. But if you're looking up, an iTheme Security Pro plugin, you might see deals that seem too good to be true, and they're probably too good to be true, just because they're not the pro plugins probably not coming from the actual developer's website. And if it's not coming from the developer's website, they might have a deal with these guys. But I would definitely reach out to the actual developers of the plugin or theme to ensure that they are working with them. Because unfortunately, these people just go and copy and paste the images of the actual developers and then put them on their site, make it seem like they're affiliated, and then they sell you a 2-year-old version of the plugin, or they sell you a version of a plugin with their added code so they can scrape all the information off your site.
Yeah, absolutely. So generally speaking, plugins that are in the WordPress plugin directory, they've been screened. Some of it's done in an automated way, but there are good, smart people who are looking over every submission of a plugin, and especially for security issues. Well, I wouldn't necessarily rely on that 100%, but it's probably 99%. There are really good people who are watching those things.
Absolutely. The WordPress.org repo is great. It's a great, safe marketplace. It's definitely one of the reputable marketplaces that you can go to and feel secure.
Yeah. The other thing that I would suggest, how do you know if a developer is reliable? Michael, would you mind opening up a browser tab and just go into wordpress.org/plugins?
What? Okay, if I can type, I go there quite a bit, as you can see.
And let's just click on one of the, scroll down a little bit. Let's just find a plugin. Let's look at, let's do that one, that two-factor, or in any of those right there. Do that two-factor plugin.
Okay.
And what we're going to do is click on the development tab. This is a way to find out a little bit about the developer. If you scroll down, look at the metadata. Sorry, up just a little bit. What you're going to see is, okay, how many active installations does the plugin have? How many people are actively using it? 5,000, that's a pretty good amount of people. If there are 10 people using it, you may want to, second guess that. The other thing that you might look at is, I'm trying to find, I think they just changed this view again. I think if we click on advanced view over under the metadata, we'll see something about the developer. Okay, there's contributors. If you look at, let's just click on that first contributor's name, the George Stephanis, and this will show you, a little bit about the developer, what he's done. Look, he's a core contributor. He's a WordCamp speaker. If we scroll down, I think we'll be able to see all the plugins. Yeah, click the plugins link there. You can see, he's got a lot of plugins. So this is a reliable developer. That's a good way just to kind of click around and investigate this developer on WordPress.org and see what he or she has done. If they have one plugin in the directory and it's got 10 installs, you might want to look at a different option for a plugin.
Absolutely.
Here's a question. Bob is making a comment here. A simple way to protect your website is to set your files or folders to read-only after you build the site. What do you think about that, Michael?
That definitely can add a layer of protection from the server side. That definitely is one thing you can do to limit some of the opportunities to exploit code. But unfortunately, if your site gets compromised in other ways, those file permissions can be easily changed to 775 to make it friendly for everyone to execute.
Yeah, and within iTheme Security, there is a section that allows you to look at the file permissions just to make sure at a glance if everything is set correctly.
But yeah, definitely, it's definitely to be in good practice of doing that. And if you ever have someone in support telling you the best way to fix an issue is to make your WordPress your file permissions 775, ask for escalated support.
Without a doubt. And there are definitely hosts out there that are more adept at supporting WordPress than others. Matter of fact, among some hosts, there's a real anti-WordPress bias for whatever reason. Whatever host you choose, make sure that they love WordPress and they support WordPress, because that's going to go a long way to making your experience running a site really better. Again, if you have a question you haven't asked yet, please do so over at ithemes.com/chat. We'll hang around here for another couple of minutes to make sure all the questions get answered. There was some talk a little bit ago about some SSL training and how to convert WordPress over to running HTTPS. And I dropped a link in there about some previous training we've done on that subject as well. Let's see. Yeah, Louis has said securing passwords is a must, but also the typical username, like having a username admin, is also an issue. Michael, what would you say about that?
Yeah, I agree. Don't use admin as a username ever. And then also one of the other thing people need to be aware of is that now you're seeing now that more people are using two-factor and making it more difficult for people to hack like actual websites. Now people are trying to take advantage of like hardware exploits. So if you are using a router right now and you're still using the default username and password that came with that router, I would definitely go ahead and change that, just because better safe than sorry while we're talking about using admin. So a lot of times it's just admin's username and password. They can go in and configure all the settings to scrape all your data and send it where they want to, and yeah, not fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And the issue with the admin username is that basically, if you have a username admin on your website, you've given a hacker half the information they need to log into your site already. Admin is installed by default, so that's usually one of the first things that a hacker is going to try. That is why, by the way, there's a feature in iThemes Security that allows you to immediately ban any IP address that tries to log in using the username admin, just to eliminate that issue right off the top. Now, Marcy would like to know, Michael, what do you think about this? If you have a username admin, would you change the username by adding a new user and deleting that admin user, or is there an easier way?
If in order to delete that user, you're going to have at least another admin user, yeah, that's probably the best, most straightforward way to just take care of that. Just go ahead and just delete it and transfer it to the new user.
Yeah, exactly. You just create a new user, and when you delete the admin user, it'll say, okay, what do you want to do with all the posts and so forth that this user has created? Just assign, you can pick the other user you just added and assign that content over to that new user. But yeah, delete it and get rid of it. All right, Michael, I think we have come to the end of our questions. Folks, if you have not asked your question and you still have a security-related WordPress question, right now is the last chance if you want to drop it in the chat room. While I'm giving that another 10 seconds or so, I do want to give you the slide link for today's slides if you'd like those. Once again, there in the chat room, there's a Google Drive link where you can download the slides. And I believe that is it. So, Michael, hey, thanks for a good presentation today. This is really good information that everybody needs to know about WordPress security vulnerabilities and how to protect yourselves. Those are wrapping up today. Any last comments for the folks that are listening?
Hey, I just want to thank everyone for coming by. The more people that we have in the WordPress user community that take security seriously and are proactive in securing their websites, the better reputation WordPress is going to have, which means the more community, the larger our community will grow and the more opportunities we will all have. So very important that you guys are here, and I really do appreciate it.
Absolutely. And we've picked up a couple of additional training ideas from this conversation. There was a suggestion in the chat room about maybe doing an email about, doing a webinar about making sure that email deliverability, that issue is taken care of. I think that came up during the two-factor authentication talk. And sometimes if you have a WordPress site and your email routing is not configured correctly, then a lot of the transactional emails that are sent from your site, whether it's contact form requests or orders or the two-factor emails, they can get delivered to spam or not delivered at all, and that's not the security plugin's fault or the form plugin's fault. That's a settings issue on your server. That we'll do some training on that. I'm going to add that to the calendar to get updated. And also, maybe what would you guys think about doing, for those of you working with clients, doing some training on how to train your clients to do things like have stronger passwords and use two-factor authentication. Maybe some strategy on that. If that sounds good, yeah, we'll look at adding that to our training calendar as well. There are a number of webinars coming up here in the next week or two here on iThemes Training. You can see those at training.ithemes.com. There's also a way to download our upcoming webinar schedule to your calendar with an iCal link. We've got a webinar coming up tomorrow with Diane Whidden on creating a powerful brand that attracts customers. Diane is always awesome, and so that's going to be a great webinar tomorrow at 1 o'clock Central. And coming up next Tuesday, we have Aaron Flynn back with us talking about how to get useful feedback from your clients. So 2 really good webinars coming up in the next few days. Check out the full schedule there at training.ithemes.com. And also, as Michael mentioned, there's currently a 35% off site-wide special going on through the end of the month. Use coupon code SPOOKY35 to save 35% off everything site-wide through the end of the day on October 31st. So thanks again, everybody, for hanging out with us for the last hour or so. It's been great, and we'll see you next time here on iThemes Training, where we go further together.